My name is Luigi Patruno. I'm the Vice President of Data Science at 2U. And I like to take my coffee in the morning, just a single shot, black espresso. I drink it 90 minutes after I wake up. The Andrew Huberman sort of advice for how to drink your coffee. And I do intermittent fasting, so it's black, there's no milk, there's no sugar. That's how I do it.
Welcome back to another MLOps.community podcast. I am your host, Dimitri Os, and today we're talking to none other than Luigi Patruno. I'm flying solo, but this is now the third time that we have talked to him, and every time I talk to him, I just love it. That's all I can say. It's incredible for me. I get energized. You'll hear me get stoked at a few of his answers. He has been moving up the ladder in the corporation. So the first time we talked to him, he was writing a newsletter called ML in Production, which some of you OGs out there may remember. He had some really cool thoughts on what he was learning. He was documenting his journey as a data scientist and what he was learning and how he was getting into MLOps and how he was starting to look at platforms and look at how platforms can be useful for him as a data scientist and what he needs to do. Since then, he climbed the ladder, and now, as you heard, he is VP of Data at 2U. And this conversation really centered around being a manager and how he's had to change from that individual contributor role into managing people and what he's learned from that, specifically managing data products and data, how that can be a little bit different than your typical management, and how the team is composed, how he's able to balance experimentation with the confidence that he can get something done, and also how to make sure that your data team is not a cost center, it's a profit center. He's got the mind for business, which, as you hear, he talks about, it wasn't always that way. So we went over the evolution of how he went from being someone that was just really into the technology, and then he graduated and went into someone who had to learn how to speak other people's languages. And one of the things that I think I will quote and remember always is that he said, "Your CEO doesn't care about machine learning. So you have to speak to them in a language that they care about. Figure out what that language is, and you will be much more successful." Without further ado, let's get into it with my man, Luigi. I was thinking about this before we hit record, and I was saying, you have one of those names that it's a miracle you're not famous because it just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah,
exactly. That's what's coming. I imagine it'll probably be from this podcast and all 5 listeners that are going to blow you up on social media. But man, it's great to have you back here. I think you are the first person to actually come back 3 times. And yeah, that's saying something.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love chatting with you, and I really enjoyed our last conversations and all the chats that we have in between those podcasts that aren't recorded, at least not that I know of. So super happy to be back here, and I'm really looking forward to chatting.
They aren't recorded. I've been actually training a model on the wisdom that you've been giving me when we are not recording, supposedly. And so now I can have my own little Luigi that I ask for advice when I get stuck sometimes. And dude, honestly, when we chat, I find it immensely valuable because I love the way that you look at things, and I also love your practicality when you look at things, and it helps me realize that I potentially am overthinking things or over-engineering things in my head, and you get straight to the point. I feel like that is something that is innate in you. Do you think you have that quality, or is that just something that others pick up on?
No, I definitely think that's one of, I don't know if you'd call it a strong suit, but that's definitely an asset I rely on. I think I do have some ability to sort of see through things that could be related to a problem, but aren't necessarily like the crux of the problem. and kind of maybe put those like on the side for a moment, right? Like I never forget about them, but I say, let me just put them over here for a minute and zoom in on this other thing. And yeah, I definitely think that's part of who I am. I think generally speaking, I've gotten better at being polite about putting things on the side, rather than just saying, hey, like, forget about all that other stuff you're saying. Let's just focus on what I want to talk about. But I think it's, no, I definitely think I appreciate you calling that out, but I definitely think it's part of who I am. And I don't know if I've probably grown at that, but I could remember it for sort of a long time.
Well, it seems like it is something that is a strong suit when it comes to the particular profession that you find yourself in, right? And you came from the data science world, and now you are managing and you are understanding the valuable pieces of how to find business returns on investment when it comes to data. And I just think about when I talk to so many different people doing ML, there are these pains, especially at the beginning of any project, where you're trying to figure out what is really important here and what is valuable. And then you go down a path and maybe 2 weeks later, you realize that that's a dead end and you have to go and backtrack, or you have to try and go down another branch and explore. And so when it comes to you being able to see what things are important and recognize them, I can only imagine how helpful that is, having you as someone that is leading a team. And I would love to get into some specifics of when you recently have felt like you've been exploring a new territory and you had to make trade-offs on decisions and whys in the road that you've gotten to, and how you made those decisions.
Sure, yeah. Makes a lot of sense. And I think, now I see your connection. That was well done. There are...
Wade right into it.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've had, certainly, as my career has progressed, my interests have changed. And, I started out as an individual contributor, as I think most people do. But in data science specifically, and what brought me into data science was my technical background, but also my sort of sense of wonder and awe at what was possible, that we could learn from experience, or that we have algorithms that could learn from experience rather than needing to be told explicitly what to do. And that's what got me into the field. But as I, even with ML in production, when I was writing on that blog, and there I was really writing from the perspective of an individual contributor. Even there, I think what motivated me to write that was that I found that what most people were talking about in the data science realm wasn't actually what the day-to-day looks like.
Yeah.
Right? There was an emphasis and focus on the tooling and the algorithms. And while that's an important component in data science, it wasn't what my day-to-day looked like. And I think at the time that was sort of a more novel opinion, perhaps, and it was encapsulated by that, I forget which paper from Google, but, the one with all the boxes, and the ML part is just a small part. And now more people believe that. But as I've grown more and more into leadership and management, what I find is that that's just a sort of a general, I think that's what separates very successful projects from projects that could be more successful, is that the successful projects know exactly what they're aiming for. And they keep that goal at the forefront of the project. And then how you go about achieving that goal, those are all tactics which are important, but they're not the focus of the project, right? So you could have, and these are all motivated by real business problems, or at least they should be, right? So you have a real business problem that you're seeking to solve. And once you describe what that problem is, you want to figure out what is your actual sort of measurable objective for this goal? How do you determine whether or not you've successfully, solved this problem or achieved this goal? And typically that, you'd want to measure that through some metric. And then everything else is just in service of improving that metric and hence solving that problem or achieving that goal, right? And so machine learning, in my opinion, is just one tool, right? And the thing that's more important is what's the problem and how do you know if you've solved it? And then sure, you could use machine learning. If it makes sense to use machine learning, you could use, just traditional software engineering to solve the problem if that's a more cost-effective way of solving the problem, right? Because you don't want to just say the problem is solved. You want to do it as efficiently as possible. That's what's going to generate the real return on the project. So I tend to see, my team's work as a potential way of solving some business problems, and where you want to look for those problems from the perspective of a data scientist is what are the types of business problems that can't be solved with more traditional software engineering and can potentially be solved with learning from data, because those are sort of that's the pool from which you want to be sort of fishing for potential impact from machine learning and other sort of data science related techniques. And there's all sorts of problems, and they span all types of business functions and functional areas. And my team specifically, we're sort of an internal optimization shop, and we look across the different areas of the business for problems. And when we're picking out which problems should we go tackle, I sort of have two criteria. One is, if we solve this problem, will it have outsized return in general, right? Does it really benefit the company to solve this problem, right? That's number one. And I think that's important regardless of what technique you're using, right? And then number two is, what are our chances of successfully solving the problem using data science techniques? Be that machine learning, experimentation, optimization, et cetera, et cetera. So if I see a problem that has a huge potential impact and for which we have a decent chance of making that impact with our methods, then that's where I think our team should go play.
Such as?
We could talk about all kinds of specific problems, but
what's one that comes to mind recently that you've had that you're like, ooh, that was a W for the team?
Yeah, I don't want to get too specific into like things I'm working on at 2U, just for proprietary reasons and that sort of thing. But I will say that there are, for instance, a lot of problems in the marketing domain. We do a lot of paid marketing work, right? Where your focus is really on trying to find those prospects who have a higher chance of interacting with your brand successfully, be that becoming a customer, returning as a customer, that sort of thing. And there you have a lot of information, both demographic and behavioral, right? And you can use that information to build all sorts of propensity models, tailor your outreach strategies. But basically how I generalize from those problems is there's a big potential impact because it scales, right? You're running a lot of paid marketing campaigns, for instance, or you're interacting with a lot of prospective customers. And you have a lot of information on those people. You have a lot of data on those people. And it's essentially impossible to beat an ML model with hard-coded logic in terms of identifying somebody who's more likely to do something, for example, right? So problem scales, so there's a big potential business impact. My company, we have a significant amount of cost related to marketing, let's say. So I know that there's a big financial opportunity. And there's a lot of data, right? And you have to use that data in automated ways to do your targeting. Otherwise, there's no way of really solving the problem. So those sort of marketing problems are a big focus area for my group.
It's like it's the perfect storm. You not only are looking at, hey, do we have the data? Is the data there so that we can go and tackle this problem? But is there that outsized return that we can look at? And how much are we, like the ways that you measure if there's an outsized return, I imagine is how much are we spending on this? How much
There you
could
go.
we
Right.
potentially make from this if things were changed? And one piece that I love, and just knowing from talking to you, I can imagine that you do it. It feels to me that you're not one that likes to reinvent the wheel. And so when you're looking at these problems and you're saying, can we fix this with data science or just with machine learning or something in our toolbox, as you were saying, you're not trying to figure out like, could we throw an LLM at this and make it like super complex and then just have this whole new way of doing it? You're like, whoa, what's the most efficient way of doing this to see a return and get the win so that we can go and show our work and show the impact that we're having?
Yeah, I mean, it's that's exactly right, and this was true back in ML production days as well, right? I would literally say that there was those days like I don't care if it's linear regression, right? It's if it works, it works, and I think how I've sort of really translated that into how our team operates is in a few ways, but and this I think is very different from other data science teams, at least with individuals I've had conversations with, in terms of how I measure our team success. And I try to do this quantitatively, and I'm always sort of updating it and thinking about it. But I think if you talk to, I tend to learn a lot from books and from just general business practices, and because data science is new, but business is not, right? Data science is newish, but it's a new capability that businesses have. But businesses have been operating for a long time, and really, if it wasn't for a business existing, like we wouldn't be doing the work we're doing as data scientists every day. I think that's something that people tend to sometimes some people tend to forget. And what do you care about there? Or what do some businesses care about? And one of the things that important business people or famous business people have said is to focus on the incentives. And if you get the incentives right, the behavior is going to follow. So as I've thought about that, I've thought through, okay, how do you incentivize a data science team to do the right thing? And in my mind, that comes down to how do you measure it, right? And for me, a lot of, sometimes we used to do this as well, where we would build a model or something and say, oh, this model achieves X% accuracy, we're awesome, right? And my thoughts on that now are, great, but what's next, right? And by that, I mean, unless we've solved the problem, the real business problem, I don't mean unless we've built the model. I mean, unless we've solved the problem and there's clearly metrics that demonstrate the problem exists no longer, or we've capitalized on some sort of challenge, I consider our efforts as purely cost to the business. We've paid salary, we've used time, we've spent time, perhaps we've learned some things, and that's great. But at the end of the day, what counts is that you've solved the problem for the business. And oftentimes in data science, what that requires is a lot of helping other departments, at least my team, because we help other teams internally, helping other teams change their operations, right? And that's what typically called like change management, right? And so I consider my data science team really a team of change agents, where we go to different business units and we help them become more efficient or capitalize on new opportunities. And how I measure our success is whether those teams have actually changed their operations and are seeing the results of our investment. And that's measurable. And if we do not have that, I consider our work either not finished or a failure, right? We may be learning some things, but in terms of the tangible impact, we don't have that tangible impact. And what this has allowed the team to do is really see themselves as wanting to bring into reality a complete change in the operation of how some other team operates. And that means that they have to be excellent partners. They have to think about things through their partner's perspective rather than just from the perspective of, oh, I need to build this model that does this, right? Some people do that, but it allows our management layer especially to always be thinking about things from the customer's perspective. And we evaluate our team through those lenses. And part of that calculation, where you talked about the efficiency, right, your question about, or your statement earlier about not bringing LLMs and that sort of thing unless necessary. It's not just like, do we solve the problem, but do we solve the problem efficiently? So how much time and effort has gone into solving the problem? And then it comes down to just an ROI calculation, right? What did you win over how much did you spend to get that return? And that's how I evaluate our team's success.
So I want to go down the path of this change management and how receptive the teams are when you approach them and your tact for approaching them. But I also want to just pull on that thread of when you were a individual contributor, were you also coming to your boss and saying, look, here's the ROI of these projects? And were you always thinking about these types of things, or was this something that you just realized is really important and it's going to be something that's always going to be important, so you need to make it a habit, and the sooner the better?
I definitely was not going to my boss with, the ROI on this needs to be such and such. I did always, though, have a desire to solve things from end to end. I was never satisfied with just working on one piece. And I don't think that's a data science specific thing. I think I'm just a generalist. I'm not a specialist. And I like to see problems from sort of start to end. And I think that's also what motivated me to go into management at 2U, because I thought that in order to have the real impact and to change how things were done, I need to have a seat at sort of higher level tables and be talking about things in business terms. Now, I don't have a business background, right? I didn't go to business school. I don't have an MBA. I came from a technical background. But as I progressed in my career, I, for whatever reason, started seeing more and more that it's necessary to understand things in financial terms. I think actually this is related to one of our sort of offline conversations where, we talk about investing.
Dude, I will always remember you being like, yeah, so I know what is important to this business because I read their 10K. And I was like, oh, you're the only person that I know that does that.
Yeah.
And actually, when I read 10Ks, I just go like, oh, this is perfect. I'm going to go to sleep so well right now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I got interested in investing on the side, nothing to do with data science. And I started, reading financial statements and learning how to read financial statements due to that interest. And then I sort of connected it with my day-to-day. And I thought, wait, why don't I think about data science projects in the sort of these terms? And also at the same time, I got a new manager, who's still my manager, who is similarly came from a technical background and then went into marketing. Sure. Specifically, he went into marketing. But we've had a great relationship, and he's really helped me to see things in more sort of business-specific terms. So I think it's a combination of my interest and then my mentorship I've received from my manager. But that's what's allowed me to, and I've certainly gone further away from technical background and technical work to more business-oriented, business-facing, but always with the lens of how do we do this with data science. So to answer your question, and I'm being a little long-winded, in the past when I would go to my manager, I always wanted to do things sort of end-to-end. And that's what sort of prompted me to do the modeling and then productionize the thing and then talk to the customers. I just was interested in it all. And I think that motivated me to continue to grow. But on that journey, I've realized that nobody at the end of the day, if you talk to your CEO doesn't care about machine learning, right? And nor should he or she, right? He or she cares about the results that the business is going to get. So I put myself in like, okay, how would I explain the work I'm doing to the CEO in terms that the CEO cares about? Because I think that's one thing that does stick with me all the time. And it's that you need to talk to people in their language, not in your language, right? The other person doesn't speak your language. Why would you talk to them in your language? You need to talk in their language. So be it the CEO or some other team that you're working with or somebody who speaks a different language entirely, right? If you speak to them in your language and they don't understand it, you're not going to do much communicating.
Yeah, nobody cares about your F1 score.
Yeah.
Especially if they don't understand what an F1 score is.
Yeah, I mean, typically they're going to say, sometimes they might say that they don't understand it. You might also have a lot of people who pretend to understand it, right? So, you're not really doing anybody any favors. And that's an action that you can take right? It's on you to do something differently, and you will increase your chances of succeeding through that work and through those actions. And that's another thing I try to stress a lot to my team is, what do you have control over?
Yeah. Well, this feels like a perfect segue into that idea of you going and doing this change management. If I'm understanding you correctly, your customer is still an internal employee at the company.
That's right.
So you're making their lives easier. And so that allows you to go and talk to them and make sure that you're giving them what they want, and you're helping them along their journey and helping them hit their goals. And so if you frame it in that lens, I imagine it's an easy sell. Now, have you encountered experiences where it isn't as easy as of a sell, and you know the right thing, or at least in your opinion, what the right thing is to change things up, but people are stuck in their ways and they don't want to, and how do you approach that? Because it's very messy, like people problem, not at all tech or data science, machine learning oriented whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, and it's a great question. And I think the key word you said that I want to focus on for a second is sell, right? Which essentially, I think, implies that you're sort of trying to persuade somebody from doing something differently than they're doing today, right? One of the things that we've learned, my team and I have learned, is that, again, I try to think about things probabilistically as much as possible, and really in terms of what's the probability of success. So if I take a step back and I say, of the types of projects we can take on, which projects prior will have a higher likelihood of succeeding? And it's projects where you don't have to sell, realistically, right? So if there are people who are knocking down your door for help, and they're saying, please help us, we have a problem, we are doing our best to solve it, but we can't solve it, and we're desperate, those are the best projects, potentially, in terms of you don't really have to sell your solution. Like, these people are desperately in search of something to solve their problems.
Yeah.
As soon as you do some ideation on your own, and your thought is to go to a team and say, hey, I have something that I think you could use, that's where things get much more complicated.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And it's worth separating sort of two factors. And I was having a conversation yesterday with a colleague, and he said things in this way, and I think it's worth repeating. So kudos goes to John Callahan. But there's a buy-in for we should do this, and then there's a commitment for, okay, we're invested in helping you do this. And what we find is that we need not only a buy-in, not only statement that this is an important problem that we need to solve, but also commitment from our stakeholders that they're going to invest time in helping us solve their problem and helping us to get their team to operate differently. Because without that commitment, you still may not succeed. And we have a number of product managers on our data science team, and it might be worth talking about like how our data science team is sort of organized, because we have product managers, engineers, and data scientists. So I tend to think of us sort of as like a full shop, because we have people who understand stakeholders and whose job is to work with stakeholders. And then we have teams that are responsible for modeling, and then teams responsible for building end-to-end solutions. And that makes our job significantly easier to do because we have all of these personalities. But our product managers have called out in our retros time after time how important it is to sort of get this step right in the beginning. Or we've had projects that have failed, and we've thought to like, why have these projects failed? And whenever our best guess seems to be that our customers weren't as invested as we needed them to be, basically our solution has tended to like push the problem further and further upstream or earlier into the life cycle of the project, where we're looking for indicators of how invested is the stakeholder group in solving this problem and committed to spending time with us. Because if we find early on that they're not, for whatever reason, we can try to solve that problem before investing an individual contributor's time into doing any modeling.
Wow. Dude, so it's almost like you have so many different variables that you're weighing out. Again, when you're going back to choosing the right problem to solve, it's not only does this have an outsized impact on the business? Is this feasible, right? Can we solve this? How likely do I think we are to solve this? But it's not just like technologically how likely we are. It's also organizationally, how
Totally.
likely are we? And when you're thinking about this, going back to that idea of how you see these experimentation phases and how you basically have to have this North Star. And if you get that, then all the other roundabout ways that you get to that North Star are just part of the adventure and the journey. And I'm wondering, what does that look like? Do you just write a bunch of documents so that everybody's on the same page? Are you making sure that you're like, how do you clarify that this is our North Star, this is what it looks like, and we're going to get there by trying these methods, but we may go off track and we're going to come back? Like always coming back to that. Is it a document, like a one-pager? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a really, I think you're sort of asking like, how do I manage the team in general, right? It's a pretty broad topic. And I can talk about a few specific things that I think have been really helpful for our team.
Hey, Laszlo here. If you're serious about MLOps, you hit subscribe right now.
One is that the people, we have a very committed group of people who I think trust me to lead the team. And that's very, very important. And one of the things I love about my team, amongst many things, is we have a really sort of long average tenure. So I would actually just today congratulated somebody in our Slack channel for being at the company for 8 years.
Oh, right? Wow.
And we have folks who've been on our team who've been at the company for 10 years, right? So we have a smallish team. We have about just under 20 people. And for some people to have 10 years at the company is huge, right? So we've really built these relationships over a long period of time. And I think people have seen how invested I am in their growth and in the team's success, that I've been able to develop trust with a lot of people, and specifically with my management layer. And, they're willing to do things differently. And so that's key. I think there are two things specifically that really leads to our success, in my opinion, and they both help us. One of them helps us stay focused, and the other factor helps us stay disciplined. And the focus part is
both of those virtues, by the way, I am sorely lacking in. So I am all ears right now when you say that.
All right.
I love this. Focus and discipline. You got my full attention, man. Tell me, please.
So on the focus part, we do very strict quarterly goal setting, and we use OKRs, objectives and key results. And at the sort of 2 months into any quarter, or a month before the start of the next quarter, I kick off a planning process with my sort of project leaders, I call them, individuals who lead projects. And we have to define objectives and key results for the following quarter. And key results are very tangible. You have to know whether or not you're succeeding, right? At the end of the quarter, you have to know whether or not this was done or not. Typically, it's tangible, it's measurable, that sort of thing. Now, each key result is basically led by a single person who is accountable for the success of that key result. And we call that person a DRI, or directly responsible individual. So the project lives or dies with that person, right? And that level of accountability makes it clear to that person and to the team who's leading the effort. And if the project succeeds, fantastic. That person has done a great job. If the project does not succeed, well, it's on that person, right? So that brings a level of focus to the team, because everybody knows what we need to do. There's no confusion as to what our goals are for the quarter. And we've been doing that for several years now. The process has evolved a bit, but our setting goals in this manner we've been doing for several years. And I think one of the more specific instances where I saw just how useful it was for our team was earlier this year when I went on vacation for 3 weeks, right? Now, I went on vacation for 3 weeks. I did not log in at all. And I lead the department. I lead the data science department at GU. And I just remember thinking, I wonder what things are going to be like when I come back. Like, I hadn't been on a vacation that long in something like 4 or 5 years, right? Because in that interim, I've had a kid, I moved, COVID, right? So the longest vacation I'd taken in 5 years was like a week. And I was going away for 3 weeks, excuse me, I was going to Italy, different time zone, everything. So, and when I came back and I checked in, everything was proceeding as planned. And I was amazed. And when I talk to people, everybody likes to, I think we have a good sense of humor on the team, but everybody said, you could have been away for another 2 weeks. We were doing our thing. Everything was going fine.
Yeah, they're like, actually, we don't even need you. Just come back.
Yeah, exactly.
OKRs, and then we'll
right. And, a number of people said we knew exactly what we needed to do. There was no confusion as to what we were supposed to be working on. And we were marching towards succeeding on these goals, right? So I think that just brings a lot of focus.
So when it comes to OKRs, the thing that I noticed that I tend to have this bad habit of when I'm trying to set them, and I really have to remind myself a lot to not do this, is OKRs are not just a to-do list. And that is where I think you can fall into okay, we just want to see this much action. And at the end of the day, you realize there is a bit of an art form to setting OKRs, because it's not what are we going to do? It's what's the outcome that we're looking for. And we can do anything we need to do as long as it's legal, I imagine, or to get to that outcome, right? And so you really have to look at it that way and go into it with that mentality. And then on the data science side, what I also would like to know from your perspective, again, is going back to the amount of experimentation and variability that you have on projects. How can you comfortably set OKRs knowing that you may scrap a whole project because it's just not viable or it's not that interesting? Does this go back to that meter that you have, that internal gauge where it's what is the value of this project? What's the likelihood of success? And then is that how you tie it back to it?
Yeah, good question. In terms of, one of your earlier comments about OKRs versus just to-dos, I think that's my main job, right? Is to make sure, the leader's job is to make sure that the team is rowing in the right direction, right? So if we don't set goals that are ambitious enough, that's my fault, right? So I typically don't lead many of the key results. I lead a very small number of them, if any. And but my job is to ensure that the larger set of them, if we achieve some probability of success against these initiatives, that the investment in a data science team is worth it to the business, right? Is worth it to the organization. So it's my job to make sure that we have a good mix of projects, all of which could have big impact on the company, but there's going to be variability in terms of the likelihood of success in any single project, right? So if you put all your eggs in, it's classic diversification, right? If you put all your eggs in one basket, and that basket, you lose that basket, you have no more eggs, right? So we need a good mix of projects whereby if we succeed in some number of them, we've done a good job. But if we fail in any individual project, that's not going to kill the team. So, that means working with a diverse set of stakeholders, right? So folks in marketing, product, finance, other operational teams, working in a mix of, and that mix of projects should include areas where we have good reason or confidence to believe that we'll succeed, maybe because the problem is a problem that we're just continuing to work on from some period of time, or something that's close enough to a previous model we've built that we believe there's a considerable likelihood that will succeed. And then there will be some projects that are, brand new. And maybe in those projects, we'll want to run sort of like a POC, where before promising the moon, we'll say, hey, we'll devote a quarter to working on this and we'll see what we can do. And then we'll come back at the end of the quarter and determine whether or not the organization should grow its investment in this particular initiative. So there's ways of hedging against the sort of unknowability or the harder to predict success of data science initiatives, because they are closer to sort of research than just pure development. Earlier in my career, I thought it was a hard problem, but as I've spent a lot of cycles on a lot of projects, I realize it is a challenging problem, but there are straightforward ways of going about it.
Yeah, I like this. Again, it's going back to the idea of likelihood of success. And if it is similar to something that you've done in the past, or if it's optimizing something that you already see is working and it is creating a lot of value for the business, then you are that much more confident that it's going to be successful.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, and I can comment on that discipline piece if you're interested.
Oh yeah, I cut you off completely, dude. That's the other part. See, focus. See what I mean? I got distracted before you even got to discipline.
It's all good. No, you had good questions. So the goals help us focus, right? And then everybody has to be invested towards solving those goals. The discipline part means, for me, if you do the same task multiple times, I want to get the same excellent result. Right? So if we're going to build a model, you have different data scientists, you have different teams, you might get slightly different results. You might get different results in how the model is documented, or how the pipelines are built, or how the stakeholder communications go, and how many meetings you need to have in order to get the project complete. And I want that down. I want that variability driven to zero, basically. And the way you do that is by developing processes that people need to follow, right? So, earlier in my career, I thought we don't need any processes, and I've realized that's a good way to fail as your team grows. And how we've gone about solving this problem, I actually totally borrowed this solution from GitLab, which is a company. GitLab has a public-facing handbook of how their company operates. And it's online, you can Google GitLab handbook, or I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes.
Yes,
but you can find how every one of their teams runs their departments in a static website. So I saw this and I thought, this is a great idea. And I also love the format. It's a markdown file stored on GitHub, so they're version controlled, which has a lot of benefits because you can see how processes have evolved over time. And so we borrowed this idea, and we have a data science handbook. And this handbook we're constantly updating and contains all of our processes. We document exactly how we do quarterly planning, exactly how we pick projects, exactly how we develop data science products. We have expectations for how data analysis should be done. So, for instance, we have a categorization system of how much, if this analysis is for another technical stakeholder versus a technical internal teammate versus a non-technical stakeholder versus an executive. There are different requirements for how the analysis should be completed in order to be deemed sort of acceptable for that stakeholder. We have all of our technical guides. So, we use AWS, we use a number of other systems, and we describe exactly our bias in how we use these systems, right? We expect people on the team to use the system this way. And anybody on the team is allowed to contribute processes to the handbook. It's as simple as opening a pull request, writing the process, and then having it go through a review process with individual contributors, and then myself sort of as the final. I call myself the czar of the handbook. I'm the last say. But but anybody is allowed to contribute, and everybody is not only allowed but expected to contribute.
I think the most surprising part about that is data scientists are using Git.
I mean that's sort of like table stakes on my team.
Yeah, you don't let any of that mess around. So I think that there was the last time that I talked to you, you were just starting that. And I remember distinctly one of the questions that I asked was, how do you prevent this bus problem, right? Where if one person knows how to do something and you have them get hit by a bus, then it just doesn't take down that whole project. Yeah, write it down. And I think it was the beginning of this handbook phase, because you were like, we're starting this new thing and I'll get back to you on how it goes. Are you fully bought in on it? It's been a lifesaver or what?
Yeah, it's been like very incredible actually, because it takes time for it to bootstrap the system basically. But we now have, I don't know how many pages on the handbook, let's say somewhere like 30 to 40 to 50 pages on the handbook. And everybody on the team has contributed at least one page.
Nice.
And individuals are often talking about, I need to add a new process to do this. And I think it's been one of the most impactful things on the team, because I often get, comments from individuals and they say, I just the number of questions that they have to answer for how they do things has just dramatically fallen. And they can just point somebody to a particular page in the handbook. And, you write something once and it's read many times. So the number of times you have to repeat yourself is drastically reduced. And at the end of the day, this is just, this is just a standard sort of business best practice, right? This is not different. Maybe the fact that we're using markdown files on GitHub and hosting it as a static site is different. But I think that's a sort of incremental improvement on the system, right? The real win is that there are things that you do multiple times and you want to make sure the quality of those actions or tasks remains very high and consistent. And the best way to do that is to specify as explicitly and directly as possible how that work should be done, or at least what the expectations are for the quality of that work. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book, The E-Myth. Yeah, it's a popular sort of entrepreneurship business book, right? And if you've read The E-Myth, one of the main points that the author drives home is that you want to create this sort of turnkey business that you can sell to somebody and the thing just operates well. And in order to create this turnkey business, you need to have your processes very well defined so that if you hire new people, they know exactly what to do and they believe in the process. And I've read this book recently, but it very, very recently. So it didn't influence my idea to build a handbook and our team's subsequent doing of that. But I see that now and I think, okay, I'm trying to build a turnkey data science operation. I'm trying to build, a machine, a data science machine that runs. And when we add new people, they know our brand of data science and how we do things. And that's what's going to that's the discipline. That's why I call it discipline, right? We do things in a certain way, and we do this because we expect a certain level of outcome. So if we have a focus on what we need to achieve, which comes from our goals, and then we have disciplined way of working towards our goals, again, we increase our chance of success, right? And that's just generally how I see in this sort of process here.
Yeah. When I listen to you, I can feel the conviction, and it makes it sound so easy. And I'm like, dude, I'm ready to go. That's why I always get pumped up when I talk to you. I'm like, I'm out of here, man. I got to go take action before this high wears off. So one thing I want to talk about though, before this high wears off, is how you interact with the data platform, the machine learning platform, how that even looks like organizationally, because is there a platform team? is the data science team. You mentioned a bit about how you have like kind of your
Yeah.
own unit, and
Yep.
there's product people in this unit, there's engineers, and there's data scientists. Are you building on top of a platform? And then if you are, I get the feeling that the platform team is doing to you all, and especially the data scientists, what you do to the change management when you go into the business, right? There's like there's some ways that you can compare notes or whatnot. So break down how it looks.
Yeah, so this is great. It goes back to how like the team is organized, and everything that our ML platform is internal to our team. So let me take you through a couple of the teams. So let me start with the data scientist. Basically, we have a data scientist organized into a couple of sub-teams. So there's a sub-team that's focused on marketing problems, for instance. There's a sub-team that's focused on our learning marketplace. So it's more sort of product related. So you acquired edX.org, and edX is a product or a tech platform. So there's data scientists who are focused on that. So a little bit of specialization, but not much. But the major difference between those two teams is how they operate. In one team, we have a much more sort of centralized project-based model where we have a bunch of data scientists who work with ML engineers on our team and product managers on our team to deliver a project for some of the group. Right. So in those models, the product managers act as the interface to other internal teams, and they work to scope out the project, understand the challenges. Then those product managers work with the data scientists and the engineers to design a solution. And then the data scientists and engineers build out that solution. The other data science sub-team is an embedded model. So those data scientists actually go work within the product squads that are working in the business. Right, so one is decentralized and one is completely centralized. And it makes sense for the stakeholders with whom they're working. The ML engineers have two roles. One is to work within projects in those project teams, right? So they work within a project in a sort of vertical fashion. Maybe they need to operationalize a model, build some monitoring onto a model, deploy some pipelines, that sort of thing. That's their vertical function. And the ML engineers also play a horizontal function, meaning they are responsible for building and maintaining the ML platform that the data scientists and ML engineers use within projects, right? So we actually use a third-party solution. So they're responsible for, they just actually did this, we got a new platform this year. They went through a procurement process and they did for the data scientists exactly what you described, right? Where they had to understand how data scientists work on projects and what they need in a platform. And then they went out and got the solution and tested it and ran. They did an excellent job. And we have a new solution now that the data scientists are raving about.
Nice.
Still early days, but they're really excited about it so far. And then the last group, the product managers, are really responsible for understanding projects, understanding our goals, helping to set our OKRs, and ensure that the projects succeed in achieving the business objectives.
So basically, the ones that I'm really interested in hearing about when it comes to the platform and how they work with it are the decentralized ones. Do they still have the ability to make choices, or are they also coming back to this platform when they need to do things?
So everybody's using the platform, be it on a centralized or decentralized, and because the platform gives you like notebook environments, it lets you host models, lets you build data sets quickly, but there are all sorts of features in the platform that any data scientist can use. So there's some auto ML functionality. So as part of the procurement process, the vendor review, the ML engineers collected requirements from every data scientist on the team, and then presented potential solutions, ran POCs, that sort of thing. So everybody was involved there, but everybody's expected to use the platform, and that's that itself is in our handbook.
Nice. Okay, so I get it. It's only organizationally that the centralization and decentralization happens.
Correct.
It's not necessarily on the tooling side, the standardization of what you're doing. So that makes sense. Now, as far as the way that that platform links to the greater data platform, is that something that, like, how does that look? Take me through that, because
Yeah.
I always see it kind of as, and I'll tell you, it's a very simplistic way of seeing it, but it's like there's the data foundation, and then you have different columns that are built off of that, be it the analytics or
Sure.
the
Yep.
machine learning or et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So at 2U, data science and data platform are two different teams. And data platform encompasses data engineering, business intelligence, some sort of analytics engineering, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then data science is my team, which encompasses machine learning, experimentation, exploratory data analysis, that sort of thing. Specifically, we use Snowflake. So we use Snowflake. We use things like Tableau for BI. So, our ML platform, we've hooked it up to be able to plug into all of these other tools. So we can query data directly from Snowflake or from our other data stores. I'm not sure how much we've done with Tableau directly, but my team doesn't really use Tableau very much as a visualization tool. But our ML platform is connected in our virtual private cloud to our data platform. And another responsibility for the machine learning engineering team is they're really our conduit, data scientists' connection to the rest of the engineering org. Yeah. So they're responsible for integrating our solutions into the greater software ecosystem, including our ML platform.
Yeah. Are they the ones that get pinged if the model goes rogue at 3 a.m. in the morning?
Well, they're the ones who set up the systems so that they won't have to get pinged.
There you go.
Right. So they have the monitoring solutions and the drift detection systems and that sort of thing, so that if there is a problem, they know ahead of time.
Yeah.
That's not to say that it always happens that way. We've had plenty of problems in the past, and you just got to stay flexible and sort of solve things and come up with new processes to make sure the same mistake doesn't happen in the future.
Yeah. The last thing that I wanted to finish up on is closing the loop on something you said earlier around the idea of incentivizing, and getting your incentives right will get you a long way. And I know that because I've seen it firsthand, and I think particularly coming from the sales world.
Yeah.
Sales is all about incentives, and it's very much it's a fast feedback loop. And if you can step back, you can see how certain incentives will drive you to do certain things. And so I think about it if you're an SDR that's trying to book a meeting because you get paid more if you book meetings, then you're going to book low quality meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to care because it's not your problem. You're getting paid for these low quality meetings. If you're an AE that gets incentivized on how much deals you close, how many deals you close, and the revenue count, you're going to close deals even if they're not the best fit. It doesn't matter, because you're well, I'm still getting paid, and now it's CS's problem, so I don't care. So when you're looking at it from the data aspect of things and incentivizing your team, you said it earlier, you've got ways that you like to incentivize the team, which I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, is along the lines of making sure that they understand when things are successful and how things can be successful. And then they know that, wow, I have the power to affect change here.
Yep.
I have the power to actually do something that has these outsized returns. Are there any other ways that you're incentivizing and you found that incentivizing the team works well?
First, one comment on sort of the quality. You mentioned booking, SDRs just booking pointless meetings, or AEs closing bad deals. And again, I just read a lot, so I consider myself a very unoriginal person sometimes, but I'm good at borrowing good ideas, cloning good ideas, and I'm shameless about it. The best management book I've read and reread, it's called High Output Management by Andy Grove, right? And in this book, he talks about KPIs and measuring your success. And his point is you should have your indicator and it should be paired with a quality indicator. So if you're measuring something, you should measure not only the thing, but also the quality of the thing. And by pairing those together, you have a tighter loop to make sure that you're doing the right stuff, right? So, if you look at in your sales example, or your SDR example, like the number of meetings that you've booked that actually leads to a next action could be a better way of incentivizing just than the number of meetings. So the number of meetings that led to, a call with an AE, right? Because that led to some actual action and is a higher quality call than just a call that you had, right?
Yeah.
So having quality indicators is useful. In terms of the incentives, I think the philosophy of how to manage, like what you need to do, is actually like pretty simple, but it doesn't make the job easy. I think it's just like a sort of straightforward to describe, but hard in practice. And another book that I recommend, there's a book I recommend to all managers, and then there's a book I recommend to everybody. And the all managers is High Output Management. It's the best book on management I've read. And the book that all people should read, all employees should read, is called The 1 Minute Manager by Ken Blanchard, right?
Yeah.
And it says basically it's good for managing as if it's your first management experience, and it's also good for knowing how to be managed. And there's sort of three things that a manager does. One is make clear to the employee what that person needs to do. So specify the goals. That's number one. Number two is call that person out for doing a good job when a good job is done. Right? So positive reinforcement for successfully doing the job. And then number three is tell that person when they're doing something wrong immediately. Right? So in my opinion, the job of the manager is to tell the employee where he or she needs to go, and then to act as the signal for course correcting that person's actions. Right? So here's where you need to go. Now it's your job to go there. I can't do your job for you.
Yeah.
But I'm going to act as the bumper lanes to tell you when you're far off course or when you're absolutely on course. Right? And when you're far off course, you need to tell the person because they may not know. And it's your job to tell them. So you need to deliver that critical feedback to get them back on course. And when they are on course, you want to positively reinforce that because it's going to psychologically give that person pleasure. Right? And that person is going to want to get more and more of that positive reinforcement. So if you enforce the good things and tell somebody when they're doing something wrong, you're basically training them to be more and more productive. So, to answer your question about incentives, I think those are the key things. Set the right goals. Let people know when they're doing a great job. And it doesn't need to be like a project is completed. It could be minor steps along the way, or maybe not minor steps, but steps along the way towards completing a goal. Let them know that they did a great job on that pull request review because you saw their comments and you thought it was a very thorough job. That person should know. And then you should say it publicly because other people see that behavior and then they want that kudos, right? And they know, okay, for the receptive person, this person did a great job on this pull request. What made it a great job? I want to do that great job next time. And when you're delivering critical feedback, I believe you deliver that critical feedback in a one-on-one way. You don't make that public. You pull the person aside and you say, hey, this was wrong for such and such reason. Either, the work wasn't to the quality I expected to be, or your behavior was off, or whatever it is, right? It doesn't need to be a monumental thing, but you need to tell that person immediately, timely, and, repeatedly if necessary.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of course, we both have kids, and I am learning a lot with my daughter. And one of the things that I am doing now that she's 4 is I'm trying to get good at giving her positive reinforcement. I don't want to just give the basic, great job. Oh, you're so good. You're so smart or whatever. And some things that I've seen is that people say it's much more effective if you can call out specific things and say why those things are whatever the thing is. If it's good, then why is this good? Instead of saying, oh, good job, it's like, wow, you drew a house and a bird. That shows me that you are creative.
Absolutely.
And getting excited about that instead of just, hey, whoa, you're so good at drawing. Cool. And so being able to make it very detailed in the positive feedback is incredible. I think, at least for the receiving end, because if it's just pie in the sky, oh, good job, yeah, great, you're doing great, then it doesn't mean much.
Right.
It's a lazy compliment, I would say.
I agree. Yeah, you want the compliment to mean something. That's why I don't think you should compliment somebody for everything they do. You shouldn't compliment somebody for doing their job, right? They're being compensated for doing their job. You should compliment somebody for going above and beyond and for demonstrating behaviors that you think are exemplary, and that you want other people to imitate.
Yeah, and this nipping it at the bud when it comes to the bad parts is another huge one. And I just realized, I mean, when you go back to the 1 Minute Manager, I learned so much from that book. And not that I even manage that many people, right? In the MLOps community, we don't have a ton. But still, what I realized is there's like a million of these 1 Minute Manager books, I think. Now, he's written, and they're all super thin, so you can read them in like a day.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
in an hour.
Yeah, you feel like, wow, I'm ready. Again, it's that high. I'm like, nothing's going to conquer me now. I'm the manager. I can do this. And one thing that I always stick with from one of those books that I read is the monkey, how he talks about your employees will come and they'll have this monkey on their back and they'll throw it onto your back. And then all of a sudden you're the manager, but it feels like you never have any time to do anything because you're doing your employees' work. And it strikes me as you not being the type of person that takes on other people's work. And again, I don't know what it is. I think it might just be part of your personality, but I think you're able to draw clear boundaries of, nope, that's your shit. You take care of that because that's your job. And I'm going to be over here guiding you, but I'm not going to do it for you.
Yeah, I read that article. That's actually a separate article. Harvard, I think a Harvard Business Review article from like the 80s or something, the 90s. It was written a while back. And I actually read that in my current job. It was like sent to us by HR department at some point. But I loved it. And I think now I've gotten much better. But I used to, when I started, because I'm a sort of perfectionist, I definitely have that quality. When I started managing, it was very hard for me to be hands-off. Not only when somebody came to me with a problem, but even if they didn't come to me with a problem, right? And I would just want to jump in. But you're doing the wrong thing there, right? Because you need the person to be productive. So it's on you to, as a manager, to coach, but not do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very, very important job. So there are times where, and I actually explicitly tell myself, I remind myself to do that sort of thing. So recently, somebody who reports to me came to me and said, hey, the stakeholder's having this issue. What should I say? And I just looked at the person and said, what do you think you should say?
You know what to say.
And then the person said it maybe a bit less organized, because I asked that person on the spot. And the person said, I think I should say that, but more coherently. And I just said, I think that's a good idea. And that was the coaching, right?
Yeah.
So, but in the past, I would have said, oh, you should say this, this, and this, and this is why. But that doesn't.
Let me write you an email. I'll
It
map
doesn't
it all out in an email.
Right. That doesn't force the person to think at all, right? one of the things I say is like, you should always come to me with a solution, even if you have low confidence in it, because we can work on the confidence part, we can fix it. But, I want to see that you've put thought towards what the solution should be.
Yeah. Dude, I love this. So before we completely wrap up, the last time that we talked, I asked you a question. And I thought you had a very poignant answer. And I'm going to ask you the same question and see how things have changed. I asked you about your blind spots and what you think are certain blind spots that you may have right now. And when you're going through your day-to-day, in data, in management, however you want to interpret this, what are some things that you're constantly trying to look out for and get better at because you feel like maybe you're not that strong at, or you have a blind spot in that area?
Yeah. I don't remember what I said last time, being completely honest, but I would be curious if I say the exact same thing. Maybe you can call me out.
Well, that's it.
I think it's the blind spot is being too conservative, meaning because you want to succeed, I may not take on as many bigger potential projects for which I don't have that prior data to help me understand what our actual rates of success are. So I may just like hold them to the side. So if you want to, increase your rates of success, you tend to go towards areas where you already have a lot of data. And so projects that are similar to projects you've already worked on, stakeholders who are similar to stakeholders you've already worked with, techniques that you use that have already shown themselves to be successful. So, for instance, like LLMs and that sort of, there could be a lot of there are a lot of areas of high impact at 2U with LLMs, and there's a couple teams working on these things. And actually, we ran an internal hackathon earlier in the year to build some products with LLMs that was very successful in a couple of different dimensions. But we haven't yet pulled the trigger on like an actual POC with LLMs. So I think that's something that I'm thinking through, not just LLMs, but in general. But like, how do you not get too conservative and remain sort of visionary with your bets? I think that's the biggest one.
So it's trying to get on base as opposed to trying to hit a home run.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah, or really just like I would say even earlier upstream, taking the swing. Like taking the swing versus just watching the ball come past the plate.
Yeah, incredible, man. I appreciate you coming on here again and doing this. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Luigi. We are probably going to have you on for a fourth time, and I look forward to when that day comes. Until then, people want to connect with you. We'll leave your information in the description, along with all these great recommendations that you talked about. I think it's awesome that you're coming on here. You're helping me a ton, and I'm sure you're helping a lot of other people out there. So thanks, dude.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Hey, I'm Vishnu. I'm a data scientist at Firsthand, and I definitely think that you should subscribe to the MLOps Coffee Sessions podcast. It's the best podcast out there to stay on top of what MLOps actually is, to talk to the true thought leaders in the space. And oh, by the way, Demetrios is absolutely hilarious. What a weird guy. You should definitely subscribe to the podcast.